What's going on, guys? It's Cooper Codes. In this video, we are going to use the GPT-4 Vision with Next.js 14 to create this basic project here. GPT-4 Vision was just announced, and it brings a lot of interesting functionality when it comes to taking AI and applying it to images. So this video is a great place to get started when it comes to learning how to upload images, how to make the actual OpenAI request to analyze the images, and everything like that. So just to walk you all through the project, we can upload an image here by choosing a file. I have a handful of images here, and I'm going to break the fourth wall by using the thumbnail of the video you're watching. This has probably never happened in your life, so this is a little shattering. I apologize. But then I'm going to ask ChatGPT its opinion on the thumbnail. I think right now the prompt I'm using is like, what is this image? So we'll see what it says. As we can see, it's going to give us a response that is getting streamed to the front end. So GPT-4 Vision is telling us it's a graphical user interface, and it does get it on the mark that it's instructional content related to version 14 of Next.js. Amazing. So as you all can see, it gives us some really interesting insights based off of just images. Although this is a more simple implementation of using the AI, and you can use it just like a chatbot as well, I wanted to emphasize the uploading image and how to handle that on Next.js 14. This tutorial has no external dependencies. It's just Next.js 14 and OpenAI. That's it. Let's get started by creating our Next.js 14 project. So I've gone over to VS Code, I've opened up an empty folder, and I'm going to run the create next app at latest command to create our next application. It's important that we include Tailwind CSS just for the initial UI of this tutorial, so we can press enter. We don't want to use a source directory, so press no there. App router we want to use. And then the default import alias, I'm not going to change that, we can just press no. Then it's going to set up our Next.js 14 app. I named my project GPT-4-project, so it's going to create all the boilerplate code here. Remember that in Next.js, everything gets held within the app directory, so we can go into app and look at our initial page.tsx here. If you guys want, you can npm run dev and see what this looks like, but just to save us some time, I'm going to completely get rid of the initial homepage. So make sure you delete all those lines of code, and we are going to have an empty return statement. Just to make sure everything is good to go, I'm just going to make a simple hello. Remember that in our terminal, we're still on the outside here, so we want to go into our Next.js project by saying cd, then the name of your project. I did GPT-4-project. Then from here, we can npm run dev to start our development server. A quick way to get to the local host here is to control and then click. Now we can see the very basic hello coming from our page.tsx. Let's get started by creating a rough outline of what we're going to do in each part of this tutorial. So just so everyone's on the same page, this is the order I'm going to be following in this tutorial. I'm going to create the initial UI, which is going to be inside this home component just for simplicity. Then I'm going to create some of the file upload logic. So this takes into account like uploading an image, something called base64 strings. And if you don't know what base64 strings are, do not worry. I'm going to go into that in detail in that part of the tutorial. After we create the file upload, I'm then going to create the API route logic. This is going to be something like post API / analyze image, something like that. And in the API route itself, we are also going to have, of course, the OpenAI logic. And then once our API route's actually returning things, we are going to handle the streaming of data to our front end. So this is like when you see ChatGPT talk block by block. So it'll just give you one piece of information at a time, which you can show on your front end. And then at the end, I'll have a very light discussion / where to go from here. Let's get into creating the initial UI for our project. So I'm going to make a div that's going to wrap around our entire home here. And we are going to be using Tailwind CSS for all these different classes. So I'm going to make it a minimum height of the entire screen. So this div is going to span the entire height of our screen. It's going to be a flex row technically. Is going to have an items -center and justify -center because we are going to center that kind of block to the middle of our screen, and then a text -medium. I might change this, but this just means that by default inside this div, all the texts are going to be size medium. So now we can make that card in the middle of our screen that holds all the different components you guys saw initially. So we can say div class name is equal to bg-slate-800. Going to be a width of full, which is an interesting trick, is you make the width full and then you say the max width has to be 2XL. This means it's going to look like a max width of 2XL the entire time. Then I'm going to give it some rounded corners by saying rounded-large, and then a shadow dash medium, just to give it a cool shadow look, and then P-8 for some general padding around it. So let me add some text to the top here, and then we can go and check out what this thing is looking like so far. I'm going to give it a H2 at the top, which is going to say uploaded image, and it's going to have a class name of text-xl, font-bold, and a margin bottom of 4. My dev server is already running, so let's go check this thing out. So as we can see, it is centered to the middle of our screen, and we have that little H2 that we just put in there. Under here, I'm going to make a simple div that's going to say div class name is equal to margin bottom of 4, which I'm going to use a lot just to give everything spacing between these different components. A P-8. This is just going to hold the text that a user sees when we don't have an image. So it's going to say paragraph. Once you upload an image, you will see it here. And so that gives us that type of functionality here. All right, I'm going to step down a couple things here. And I'm going to make a simple div to hold the AI response. So what ChatGPT has to say about our image. This div is going to have a class name of border-t, border-gray-300, and then pt-4. It's going to have an H2 here, which is going to be that AI response. Going to give it a class name of text-xl, font-bold, and margin bottom of 2. And so under this thing, you would expect to see the actual AI response. And so I'm just going to say example AI response here. So let me save that. We can go take a look. Amazing. And so this little white line is because we did the border-t with a border gray of 300. So it gives a little bit of a divider line between the different pieces of content. So right now we would expect a file upload thing in the middle here where a user could actually upload their image. So let's go create that. So in between the two divs we've created so far, I'm going to create another thing here, and I'm actually just going to call it a form like this. There's going to be two parts to this form, the actual file upload and then the other button to ask ChatGPT to analyze the image. So first things first, we can create our upload image. So I'm going to go in here, make a div, and this is going to be a class name of flex and then flex-call. This is because I want to have a label and an input stack on top of each other, which I will show you guys in a second here. And this entire div is going to have a margin bottom of 6. So first things first, I'm going to have a label. It can simply just say upload image. It's going to have some classes just to make it look nice. For example, margin bottom -2, text -small, then font -medium. And then the actual input here is where someone would actually upload a file. This is going to have a class name of text-small, border, and then rounded-large, and cursor-pointer. And importantly, we need to tell it that it needs to be a type of file. There we go. So let's go check this out. All right, so there we go. So a user has a nice spot to click on and ta-da, choose whatever image they want. We still need that button for them to actually ask for the ChatGPT thoughts on their image. So let's go create that. So for our button, I want it to be centered to the middle of our card. And so we can go in here and make a div like this. And to center it to the middle of our card, one thing we can do is make this div a flex row. So we can say class name is equal to flex, just like this, and then justify-center. This means that the content inside of our flex row here is going to be justified to the center. So if we just have a one button, it's going to show the button in the middle of the row. This button is going to be a type of submit, and I'm going to give it some styling here. I'm going to say class name is P-2, BG-sky-600 is one I liked, so I decided to choose that. I'm going to round the corners by saying rounded-medium, and then a margin bottom of 4. Inside the actual button text, you can just say ask ChatGPT to analyze your image. And so with that text we just put in there, we can see we have all the different components we need for this image. We don't have the image quite yet, but now we are going to do all the different upload logic, and I'm going to show you guys how to use the image there. So now I'm going to make the functionality for when we choose a file, and then we actually click on one, it's going to show the image here, and it's going to save the image in our actual React component. One thing worth understanding here is that in this application, we are going to use the use state to hold a base 64 string, which I'm going to talk about in a second, don't worry. And because we are using a use state and also eventually using a use state to hold the ChatGPT response, that's how it gets continuously updated, is the actual component itself is holding onto that new logic and updating that state. Because we are using use state twice here, we have to use the use client above. Something that's really important to mention here is that I'm kind of doing this use client on our main page.tsx because this is a tutorial, right? And I don't want to make anything too complicated for you guys. Just understand that wherever you're using GPT-4 with Vision in your application, you should try and use the use client at the deepest part of your application you can. So let's say you had a chat window that was like a certain component of your website. You should use the use client inside of that component. I just thought that would be worth to discuss for a second because I am using use client on the page.tsx here. But as far as the actual image upload logic goes, there's going to be a process within our application. The first thing is user is going to upload an image. And I will number these because they're going to happen one by one. After a user uploads an image, we can take the image, all of its data from the user's computer, and convert it into a base64 string. And so what is a base64 string, you might ask? It is a string, so literally something like this, that represents an entire image. And so I can literally have a entire string just like this, and it can represent a certain image like this. You see base64 strings very commonly used when you want to send a request, because eventually what's going to happen is when we request the API route we create, we will pass the image, the string that we have, right, to the backend. And this string is how we're able to pass it over. And this makes the logic really simple because once we have this converted string, it's all we need for OpenAI to understand our image, see all of our image, and then even on our front end, we can take this base64 string and show the image to our user as well. And so let's get started by doing the user uploads an image. Right now, if we go down to our code here, we can see that we have an input type of file. File inputs have an event called onChange that we can listen to. And inside of onChange, we can get access to an event. And if the file input ever changes, that means that the user uploaded a file. And so I'm going to make a function called handle file change, and it's going to get past that event. So if we go up here and create a function, and we call it handle file change like this, it's then going to want access to this certain event. And I'm going to call it event to make it easier to read. A cool thing with React and TypeScript is that you can go into the event here and hover it, and you can see what it's actually typed to for the certain input. So this is a change event for an HTML input element. So we can go up to the handle file change here and type it to the change event. Change event is something that comes from React. So at the top of our application, we can import change event from React. So now that we have our change event, we can go into here and actually get the file out of the certain event. So remember that this handle file change only happens once the user's uploaded a file. We can get access to this file by saying const file is equal to event.target.files of 0. An important thing is that files could also be null if a user didn't select it, for example. So we need to say if event.target.files is equal to null. I'm going to do a window.alert, no file selected, choose a file. And I'm going to make sure to return here. And this event.target, just for clarity, is actually referencing the file input itself. So when a user selects a file on a file input, it actually gets stored inside this files list here. And so this file right here is the actual file from a user's computer. One thing we want to do now is we want to convert the user's file locally on their computer to a base64 string. And we can do this by using something called file reader. This isn't something that you guys need to know in depth, but it is a really great way of converting files on the front end. I'm going to be honest, this is kind of like something you would copy paste from Stack Overflow, and you don't really need to know the logic, but I'm going to step through it anyways. So we can make a reader to actually read files from a person's computer by saying const reader is equal to new file reader. So we can even see here that the file reader lets web applications asynchronously read the contents of files stored in the user's computer, which is exactly what we're doing. And then we can use the reader by saying reader.read as data URL, and then pass in the file, which is coming from the user's computer. So reader.onload is an event that's going to get fired, and we can set it to certain functionality. So for example, we can set it to an arrow function that then handles what happens when the user loads a file, for example. Once this onload gets called, we get access to something called reader.result. This is our base64 string. So just like before, it's the actual string like this that represents an entire image. Now that we're here, we need to do something like set image to reader.result. So let's go create our image state right now. So we can scroll up. We also have to import useState from React. I'm going to say const image, comma, set image is equal to useState of an empty string. And I'm going to type this specifically to a string like this. And while we're here, I'm going to make another string, which is going to hold our ChatGPT response. So I'm just going to call it OpenAI response and then set OpenAI response. But right now we can use the set image to actually set a string to that base 64 string we're creating. One thing we have to do because of TypeScript is reader.result could be a string and array buffer or null. So one thing that we need to do is we have to say if type of reader.result is equal to string. And this is going to get rid of the TypeScript errors. Boom, boom. And it also makes our application type safe. So although TypeScript errors can be annoying, they are there to help you not run into any unexpected things. And just in case you have any errors reading files from a user's computer, we can do reader.onError is equal to, and the exact same thing, we are going to create unique functionality to this specific thing when it errors. And we are just going to console.log the error. So error and then plus error. Boom. So that's all we need to do. Inside of here, I'm going to console.log the reader.results. And now we can go over to our application and see this entire string get created. So let's go do that. All right, so we can choose a file. I'm going to upload the video thumbnail. And here is the base 64 string that I'm talking about. This says data is an image / PNG, and it's in base 64. And then boom, the entire string is there. And remember, this string represents an actual image. So let's go into our code and make a way for us to see this image because it's being stored inside of our use state already. So we can just get access to it and show the user the image they're uploading. So I'm going to make a little bit of a conditional here where we're going to say that if the image does not equal an empty string, that means we actually have an image to show the user on our front end. Otherwise, with this colon, I'm just going to show them the once you upload an image, you'll see it here. So this is where we're able to store our actual image to show to the user. I'm going to make a simple div inside of here, and I'm going to make the class name of margin bottom of 4 overflow dash hidden. And I'm just going to use a simple image tag right here. Its source is going to be equal to the image string that we have. I know that might seem crazy because you might be used to source being set equal to some external link or a file you have locally. But guys, remember, this entire image string, base64 string, has the entire thing in there. I'm also going to give it a class name of width-full and then object-contain. I'm also going to give our image a max height of, let's see, I think 72 should be good. Yep. So now we can go back to our application and see the image loaded in. So let's go back over to our application and then refresh. I'm going to choose a file again. I'm going to choose a Seattle one this time. And you'll see, boom, it's being shown to us with this base64 string. This is great news because we have 100% finished all the logic we need to know for uploading images and displaying them to the user and then converting them to base64 strings. I know it takes a while. Now we can actually get into creating the API route logic. So inside of our application, I'm going to make a route handler. And it's going to be in the API/analyze image route. So inside of our app, we can make an API folder. And inside of the API folder, we can make a analyze image like this. Then finally, inside of analyze image, we can create a route.ts. So inside of route.ts is where we have all the functionality for our actual API route. To get started, we can npm install 2 new packages. One is OpenAI-Edge, and then AI itself, which is a package to help us work with streaming GPT-4 responses. So anyone new to Next.js 14 or just Next.js in general, route handlers let us create API logic such as post to API/analyze image. So if someone wanted to post to API/analyze image and this route.ts handles that request, we can do that by saying export async function post, then the request, which is coming in, typed to request like this. And so with this syntax, when we post to API/analyze image, it's going to run any of the logic inside here. So if I console.log hello world, we would literally see hello world on the server side. Inside of our post logic, we're going to need access to a couple things from OpenAI and also the AI package. So I'm going to go to the top and import configuration and then OpenAI API from OpenAI-Edge. Oh, and the API here is lowercase. Then I'm also going to import OpenAI stream from the AI package and also streaming text response. An important thing to understand is you need to have export const runtime is equal to edge. This is because we need the edge runtime in order for us to have streaming text response and also the OpenAI stream like this. If you don't have the edge runtime, the streaming text response and those things will not work. So it's super important you have runtime is equal to edge. The next thing we can do is initialize OpenAI on our server here. So I'm going to say const configuration is equal to the new configuration object given to us by OpenAI. We can then pass in an API key here, and now we got to go get our API key. So in order to get your API key, you can head on over to platform.openai.com. And I believe they recently changed up the interface to look like this. But in order to get your API keys, you go to the left here and then you press API keys. And then you can press create new secret key here. I'm going to call this subscribe to Cooper Codes key, especially if you guys made it this far. But, you know, I think that's a pretty reasonable name for a key regardless. I'm going to copy this key and make sure you copy it because it's never going to show you it again. And I'm going to paste it in to our API key here. It's important to recognize that you guys can also use environment variables to store this API key. There's already a lot of different things going on in this tutorial, so I opted to not do that here, but I would actually recommend it if you're deploying this to production. So just so I don't get flamed in the comments, I always say that. And for anyone wondering, this key will be deleted, but I do appreciate the comments when someone's like, you still have your key up. I'm like, thank you. And so now that we actually have our configuration ready to go, we can then say const OpenAI is equal to new OpenAI API with that configuration object. These few lines of code do everything we need in order to actually work with the OpenAI API, which is pretty cool. And so the post request itself, finally, we're here. So inside of the actual body of our request, there is going to be an image property and is going to be equal to the actual base 64 string. So in order to get that image, I can say const image is equal to await request.json. And this syntax is called object destructuring, if you guys want to look that up and look into it further. It's pretty much how you get this image property out of an object. And here we can just use it like this string here. And so now we can actually get our response from OpenAI by saying const response is equal to await OpenAI.create chat completion. The model is going to be GPT-4-vision-preview. And then the stream is going to be true. The max_tokens is super important here, guys. If you don't do a max tokens, you're going to get a super small response or even a cutoff response from OpenAI. There are people that are skeptical and believe that this might be a bug currently. And this might be even fixed in a couple days, who knows. But even if you guys don't want to do a bunch of max tokens, just understand that if you don't set a max tokens at all, what's going to happen is your response will be super short. So make sure you set it, even if it's like 500 or something, make sure you set a max tokens. And then the actual messages of our entire chat history here. In this example, I'm just doing a simple call and response. I'm not doing anything to mess with the messages or store them in an array, just for the simplicity of the tutorial. GPT-4 with vision is just GPT-4. So you can still talk with it like GPT-4. So you can talk back and forth. You can even ask questions about your image or what it said about your image, but I'm not doing that in this tutorial, unfortunately. Another important thing just to talk about is there is no system message. For anyone unfamiliar, the system message is a common way for us to tell GPT-4 or any of the GPT things how to act. And in many cases, it's required. But remember that with GPT-4 with vision, currently there is no system message. This may change, is a very important thing to understand here. So let's go create our message. So we are of the role user, and we are going to have some content to our message. The content is going to be an array here. And you guys might get a laugh out of this. I definitely got a laugh out of this. The stuff we're talking about in this video is so new that the actual TypeScript here hasn't been updated. This content should be an array, but TypeScript's going to tell you it should be a string. So this is one of the few times in my tutorials I'm going to tell you to use @ts-ignore. So yeah, OpenAI, if you could fix that up, that'd be good. Okay, jokes aside, we have two objects inside here. The first object is going to be type of text, and then the actual text itself is going to say, what's in this image? That's a common one I've seen thrown around, so I'm just going to follow the crowd and use that. It gets you a good initial understanding of what GPT-4 with Vision can do. The next thing we do is we put in another object, and its type is going to be of image underscore URL. And the image underscore URL here is going to be of the image that we passed in like this. And so image URL, although it says URL, to clear up any confusion, actually allows us to have base 64 images. And even in the OpenAI documentation, they talk about how they encourage base 64 images specifically, which is part of why I've talked about it so much in this tutorial. And so that's all we need to do to send in a message to GPT-4 with Vision that has a text and also an image alongside it. And incredibly important, we need this stream to be true, because under this response, we can say const stream is equal to OpenAI stream, and it's going to be of the response. So it's converting our response into an actual stream, and then we are going to return a new streaming text response here with that certain stream. And so now it's going to stream data to our front end that we still have to handle, but the streaming data is going to be there. Oh, I don't know why I had that. I had some slash up here, but make sure to delete that if you're following along. So let's go over to our front end and make a way for us to call this specific API/analyze image. So I'm going to go back over to page.tsx. I'm going to make a function called handle submit. This means that when we submit the form we created, we can call this function here. So I'm going to say form on submit, take the submit event and pass it into handle submit like this. And we can see it's a form event of HTML form element. So we can take this, scroll up, make the event parameter, type it to this. And of course, we need to import form event. So we can go up and then import the form event from React. So now we can scroll back down. And this on submit is going to get called when the user presses the submit button here. So that's when we want our ChatGPT analysis code to run. Oh, a massively important thing I forgot about. So we do need the event is event.prevent default. Submit events by default do some weird things. I think they refresh the page. They do a couple of weird things. So event.prevent default stops those weird things from happening, as simple as that seems. One thing I'm going to do is I don't want a user to call our API with no image. So I'm going to say if image is equal to an empty image, I'm going to then alert, upload an image. I'm going to make sure to return. So our function is going to stop. So guys, remember the actual route we want to post to with our image for OpenAI to analyze is API/analyze image. So we can call that by saying await fetch. And this is honestly for learning's sake is we can make this handle submit an asynchronous function, which is going to allow us to use await here. And these paths are relative. So if you just say API/analyze image, it's going to send it to the right one. And I will say relative to the base of your application. So we can pass in some options for our request, which are very important. Importantly, we want the method to be of post. We want the headers to be of content-type application/JSON. This is important because our body is going to have a JSON object. So the body here is going to be json.stringify. JSON.stringify takes an entire JavaScript object and turns it into a string that can go over our fetch request. And so I'm just going to make an object here is what I'm doing. And inside this object, I'm going to say the image property is equal to the image, which is the value of our state right here. So again, the base 64 image. And so we are going to do something here that's going to be a little weird, and it might even scare you. But once this fetch is done, it's going to be the end of its little promise, right? And so once the promise is done, you can say .then, and then you can handle the response. Because we are getting a streaming text response, we have to make some logic to handle the streaming text. I know that's kind of simple, but that's literally what we're going to do here. So although it's kind of complicated, this stream right here is of type readable stream, and that's what's going to come to our front end. On the page.tsx, there is going to be something we can get from the response, and it's going to be something called a reader. So we can say const reader is equal to response.body.getReader. This reader is the fundamental thing that allows us to access the information when we get it. And so to explain the logic of what's happening is reader allows us to read a new piece of info on each read. And so this might be like, hello, I am Cooper codes. And so if you split this up into a bunch of different strings like this, let's say, you could say read hello, read I am, read Cooper codes. And it literally is reader.read is how you do this. And in order to loop through this information as we get it, we are going to do a while true statement, which is pretty crazy because while true, you might think it might go on forever, right? But you kind of have to trust the reading logic here is the kind of trick of it. So await reader.read because it's waiting for each piece of information, if that makes sense. And because we're doing await, we have to make this an asynchronous callback function. Although I know that's kind of complicated, but we just took our function from before and made it asynchronous, that's all. And this await reader.read is going to give us access to a handful of values. So I'm going to say const done and then value are two things we can get from this object that gets created. One thing is I'm going to type this response to any because it's giving us some weird TypeScript errors just to make our lives a bit simpler. So done is true once the response is done. And so you're going to see some logic here where it's if done, then we can break like this. And so done is going to be false on every single other request. So every single value coming from reader.read is of this strange type called uint8 array. It's a common type used in networking and especially streaming in situations like this, and it actually represents a string. So in order to get the string out of a uint8 array, which is a strange type I know, we can say var string is equal to new text decoder dot decode value. And to make this easier to read, this is kind of like the current chunk is a way you could think of it. So with our current chunk, we can do something. We can say set OpenAI response, take the previous value of OpenAI response and set it equal to previous plus the current chunk. So if I had like, I made a website called, and then website.com, this is kind of what would happen is this is the previous part of our string and this is the afterwards part that's getting added on. And so that's kind of how the functionality works is it's going to keep on adding little things like this on every single step of the way. And I know that's a lot of stuff to go through and it can get confusing at times, but hopefully you guys stayed with me that entire explanation because now what's going to happen is this set OpenAI response is going to get continuously updated right here in this string. And so it allows us to show an actual response of OpenAI to our user. So we can take the OpenAI response, which we know is going to get populated from this dot then here, and we can actually show it to our user. So for example, we can put it in this paragraph right here. I'm also going to add some logic that allows us to only show this div if there's actually a response to show. So OpenAI response doesn't equal an empty string, then show this div. Otherwise, I'm going to show null. And showing null pretty much means showing nothing. All right, let's npm run dev in our console and we can get our application started up again. All right, so we can choose a certain file. I'm going to choose the Cooper Codes logo and see what it thinks of it. This is an intentionally low resolution of the logo, by the way, just to test a bunch of different stuff, right? And so I'm going to open up the console just in case we see anything strange. And I'm going to ask ChatGPT to analyze this image. Boom, it's like magic. It's like magic, although it took a while, right? All right, so GPT-4 it's giving me a compliment. I gotta take it. It's saying my design is modern and intended to resonate with those familiar with coding or programming. I'm actually not sure that's a compliment reading it now. Intended to. Well, we'll see. I will see. Hopefully it resonates. But yeah, we can even choose a different picture. For example, Seattle. Ask ChatGPT again. And so right now it's writing over our AI response. So let's go fix that. So when our reader starts, I'm just going to clear the old response. And so that way you guys can have a new response for every single new image. So it's a one line of code fix, but this is just going to make our AI response empty and give the new response afterwards. All right, let's go check it out again. So I'm going to upload the image thumbnail here, ask ChatGPT to check it out. Amazing, it has good things to say. I'm also going to choose another file here. I'll just choose my logo for the code letter. Then I can ask ChatGPT what it thinks of this. All right, good. So it cleared the AI response, which is exactly what you'd expect. All right, so although this is simple, this is a really full project that allows us to use the full stack and also show really interesting things to the user. I know this was a longer video because of a lot of the setup associated with this, but I honestly think it'd be super helpful to anyone who plans to use AI beyond a smaller project like this. Getting a good understanding of how images get uploaded, how they get handled in the backend is perfect for if you want to build an actual application with GPT-4 with Vision. If you guys like this video, feel free to like the video and subscribe for more videos like this. I'm always working with Next.js 14 and things along those lines, so feel free to join my channel. All right, thanks for watching.